Hello again. Welcome to the strategy course. Today or now, what we are going to be doing is discussing diversification, extension, expansion of the company into other industries. So this is the agenda that I like to get into. What is diversification, different types of diversification, and especially the diversification process. Trying to understand the notion of I have identified the sources of advantage, how do I benefit from them, how do I basically go into other activities outside my industry of operation, which is basically what I just discussed, the definition of diversification. You are operating in a diversity of industries. How do I understand the types? Here, it's kind of, and this is important, like other types of expansions, there is a degree of, if you want, flexibility in terms of identifying them. Single company, that's pretty much what you do. Over 90% of your revenue is coming from that business. Of course, 90% is like any other numbers, is somewhat an arbitrary number, but it's pretty much an indication that you are highly concentrated in one activity. That's what your effort is. That's what you're doing. People identify you as doing that activity. This is single business. Dominant business. Well, you are doing other activities. There is some degree of, if you want, operations in other businesses, other industries, but you still can be considered to be a dominant player. Most of your revenues are coming from that particular activity. 70% as, if you want, the cutoff point, 71%, 69%, it doesn't really matter. But it's about, if you want, 70%, what we consider a dominant business. There is still an identification that you are basically doing that. From there, we go into diversified companies. Then we have to, in addition to the percentage of sales coming from that particular activity, we have to go into how those activities, operations in different industries are connected to each other, how they are related to each other. If they are relatively well connected, they seem to be, if you want, coherent. There is some level of relatedness to them. We call them related. If they are completely unrelated, they are completely different industries, there is no technological or customer connection among them, we call them unrelated. And within the related, constraint pretty much seems to be integrated, linked. It's a story of more vertical integration. I'm operating in my supplier or the next segment within my value chain, industry value chain. Some examples, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, ExxonMobil, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway. To some extent, they represent the notion that I am identified, most of my effort is in one single company or one single business, industry, or the majority of my revenues effort, image, reputation is coming from it, but I have other activities in other industries too. While I'm operating in multiple industries, there is some connection among them, or there is very little connection among them. From here, what we're going to do next is try to understand how this occurs across the world, and it is not connected to a particular owner. These are a few examples. And yes, some of the illustrations are oldish, mostly because this is what I could find. An example, General Electric, American company, highly dispersed owners. There isn't really a dominant owner. Nevertheless, they are operating in a large variety of industries, power, renewables. Okay, they are related, but then aviation, very different type of technology, healthcare, very different type of technology and customers, additive manufacturing, material science, data analytics. Of course, you can start to try to connect them, but the notion here is, surprise, they are operating in different industries. We can also see that for family-owned companies, an example is Samsung's Chaebol, that's a business group from South Korea. They operate in also a large variety of industries, consumer electronics, telecommunications, construction, shipbuilding, medical service, financial services. Once upon a time, they were also in defense. The idea here is that you start growing, you start investing in different industries, and eventually you end up with a highly diversified corporation. We can also have, for example, in the case of the data group, it is a foundation, the one that controls the group rather than a particular owner, and yes, long list of very different types of businesses in which they operate. Again, the idea that you see an opportunity, you extend, you expand there is another opportunity, or in some cases you have to go back because you don't have a supplier, and eventually over time you end up with a highly diverse set of activities. And then, of course, we have state-owned companies, which in some cases can become groups, and they have lots of different operations that have very little relation to that. The example here is SEPI in Spain, postal services, shipbuilding, environmental and agribusiness, energy, mining, food distribution, communications, promotion, finance, leisure, and sports. Very unrelated, but nevertheless within the same corporate structure. So the idea here is diversification, you expand into other businesses, and then the question, the challenge is, how do you coordinate, how do you manage all this diversity? So one understanding or trying to understand the coordination, what do you do with all this diversity, is the BCG market growth share matrix for selecting businesses. And this is mostly coming from finance. And this is a relatively strong, oldish, if you want, framework. And the notion here is that what really matters is trying to understand whether the market in which the company is operating is growing, and whether that company has a high or low relative market share. With that, we can classify, we have all these different businesses, let's classify them. Those in which I have a very low market growth, but my company happens to be a dominant player, it is great. I have a dominance in this market, but because I don't have growth opportunities, I'm going to be generating a lot of cash from being the dominant player, but then I can basically harvest that cash and use it somewhere else. Where do I use it? Well, I have the opposite, in which there is a lot of high market share, but I have a very low market presence there. Well, maybe I want to invest it here so that I can grow the company, and if there is eventually some additional growth, it's going to be fantastic, because then it can be converted into a star in which the market is growing, it is fantastic, and at the same time I am a dominant player. I might need additional money to reinvest, but the notion here is that this is kind of the business in which I want to be, because as a dominant player I can have a little bit of control over how I operate, and also because there is growth and there is less, if you want, competitive pressure. Then finally we end up with what is called a dog. Market growth is very low. I am a very small player. The questions here is, well, why do I want to be here? Maybe I should get rid of this particular business. So this is a relatively simple way of understanding how to manage diversification. Buy, sell, it's coming from finance. Take the money, put it there. What's moving around is money. There is an alternative way, and this is a strategic way. And this is the notion of a theory, the resource-based view. This is a brief introduction. The notion here is that I have resources and capabilities. I'm going to be using them in other activities. The idea is, how do I transfer those and then take advantage of what I already have? So here, some company drivers, under this logic, the big important concept of synergies. It makes more sense to, in terms of efficiency, effectiveness, to do two activities together than separately, because I can use resources I already have. So there might be an idea that, look, I have this type of machinery, then they can produce bicycles, they can also produce scooters. Wouldn't it be logical to basically produce them together? Although they are operating in different markets, I have this machinery, I have this expertise. I can basically do things more efficiently than if I'm running them into these two different production plants. This is the idea of synergies. Cost is going to be reduced because I'm doing those two things together rather than separately. There is also, and this is somewhat connected to economies of scale and synergies, the notion that I have excess resources capabilities. So I happen to, for example, have a big plant. I'm not using all the plant all the time because I don't have a market to serve. An alternative is to internationalize or to grow in other markets, or an alternative is, well, why don't I use this big space to produce other things? I have distribution, I have my trucks taking things to one place to another. I have spare capacity. Why don't I also distribute something else? My brand name is well known. That's going to carry over and it's going to give me an advantage in other places where I have the knowledge. I have the technology. I know how to do well engines. Hey, this is fantastic. I can do them for motorbikes. It's not that different from an engine that you can use in on outboard motor for a boat, or maybe you can use it for a lawnmower. So why don't I use all this knowledge and then operate in different industries? And then, of course, there is finally the story of trying to go beyond what I already know. It's a learning. Yes, my market is doing well, but maybe there is something else I can do. Why don't I just try to stretch and go and learn something new, just in case this particular market doesn't really have a future? I can basically go into other places. And in some cases, if you look at corporate histories, there is going to be an evolution of the businesses, mostly because there is this idea that I operate now, I learn something, I have excess resources, I have some synergies, I enter another business, which then leads me to another business. And in some cases, the original business basically disappears. And then, of course, there is the managerial drive. I'm an entrepreneur. I am able to see that, hey, there are opportunities, that market is growing, it's going to be great, this is the future, why don't we invest and we use, and this is the important thing, some of the resources and capabilities we already have to try to gain an advantage there. So this is the story, and this is, and if you want a hint of the importance of understanding where I'm coming from to be successful elsewhere. And that's the story of the diversification process. Yes, if you really just want to diversify, the only thing that you need is money to invest. The question is not diversify, but do it in a successful way. It's not just putting money and entering a new industry or buying a company in another industry, but doing it in a way in which, because I do this, I'm going to be benefiting from it. So the logical, if you want, or the more strategic analysis, understanding of this is going to be first, identify why we are good. What are our sources of advantage, value creation, what are resources, capabilities, and then the next question is, can I transfer them to another industry? And from there, try to understand what do I need to do to operate there. Okay, yes, I have a brand name. Let's take it to another industry. Yes, but what else do you need in addition to a brand name? That's going to give you an initial reputation. Well, you also need a production plant. Do you want to build it? Do you want to subcontract it? Which is some of the ideas that they get into play. What about distribution? What about supply? What about connections and licenses? All of these ideas, I have something already. What am I missing? Can I obtain this? What are the complementary resources that I'm going to be enabling me to have a fully operating company? And then the story here is, can I be better than the other companies? So the story is a notion of, am I going to be able to be another player? I'm a new entrant. I'm going to be facing the usual challenges. I don't know the industry. Well, they don't know me in the industry. What am I bringing here that is going to help me be better than others? Can I basically have an advantage in the other operation? And then can I, the question is, yes, I have an advantage. I can build an advantage. Does it make sense to build both and have them coordinated within the same company? What is the advantage that those two operations have by being owned by one single parent? Because the question is, yes, I can always build another company. I can build, if I'm a serial entrepreneur, build several companies. What do I add to those companies that basically makes them better because they are together with the same parent firm? This is a story of transferring advantages within the system. And then finally, the idea is, well, that is going to be great. Can I improve there? Can I be better? And then maybe learn something, bring new resources to operations that I already have, so that the overall advantage is not something that I already transfer, but also something that can be transferred back. And as a result, because I'm diversified, I am so much better than before. Why? Because there are advantages, there are also limitation costs. There is a cost of complexity. All of a sudden, I have to operate multiple industries. It's not just the size of the company, that's a cost of a scale, but the differences in industries, the differences in clients, the differences in distribution systems and suppliers, that all of a sudden I have to integrate and manage them. And then, of course, there is my limitations as a manager. Can I basically take my knowledge? Can I really coordinate all this diversity of operations? So the notion of successful diversification, not diversification only, that only requires money, but successful diversification is a story of transferring resources that I have, building a system, and then learning and transferring resources back. So that's pretty much the story of learning for the future. Is, if you want, the final one, which I just summarized the story, is continued improvement in capabilities, in sources of advantage, so that I can continue creating value, and it is better for me to operate in multiple industries rather than only one. So that's it. Some lessons: diversification, operating in different industries and different types of diversification. From yes, I have a single business, to dominant, to related and related, and all of this is a different criteria. It's not just the level of revenues, but also how they are connected to each other. And then trying to understand the process of diversification, the logic. One is a story of finance, that's the BCG matrix. Another is capabilities stories, the synergy, how I leverage things, the stretch I want to do. And then if you want successful diversification, what is my advantage? What do I need to operate there? Can I obtain the complementary resources? How do I transfer and coordinate within the system, build a new advantage, and then learn for the future dynamics? And that's all. Thank you very much for listening.